Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a certain incident that has always been interesting to me, and I thought we should cover it in today's video. That being the Axeman in New Orleans. We're going to be looking into the killings and incidents of this case and see if we can come up with our very own theory as to who might have been the Axeman in New Orleans. Because till this day, this case is still unsolved and the killer still hasn't been identified, which is crazy because this case has happened so long ago. It is kind of similar to the Jack the Ripper case. Well, not really, but it kind of has that old school like history case that makes it quite difficult to solve. But there hasn't been some leading theories to solve it. There has been some leading theories to solving it, I mean, but we will look further into that later down the video. However, for those that don't really know what the Axeman of New Orleans is, allow me to give a brief description of what it is really fast. So around the time from 1918 to 1919, the citizens of New Orleans would live with fear and panic during a certain period of time. An unidentified serial killer would cause fear around New Orleans, Louisiana, and surrounding counties around the area. Multiple killings would take place for multiple years, with the serial killer never being identified and using different methods to kill his victims, which is most commonly known one using an axe. So yeah, it's about the serial killer that was never caught and did multiple attacks and killings pretty much. This is a pretty old case as mentioned previously, so we're going to be looking through the whole pretty much the whole thing, and we'll come up with a theory by the end. Well, at least I think I'll try. But as usual, I don't want to waste any more of your guys' time, so I hope you all enjoy the video. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Wait, I think BuzzFeed already made a video about this case. And yes, you are correct, my friend. But that video was from about 5 years ago, so I thought I would reintroduce the case, except I'm sure many of you have already seen it since it has around 20 million views at this point. But anywho, let's get back into the story. For this one, we're gonna have to go way back to a time where apparently everyone had axes in their homes. So between 1918 through 1919, the city of New Orleans would be introduced to a series of malicious murders that left many in fear. Now, quick mention before we get into any of the killings, the main victims from the Axeman were said to be primarily Italian grossiers and immigrants, so that means that this serial killer might have been a fucking racist. We'll learn more about that later on and see more about more victims, but this is how most of the killings would be. The Axemen would break into the homes of the victims and often in the middle of the night attack them with a weapon such as an axe while they were sleeping. The Axeman would only attack his victims with objects that he would be able to find in their homes. He would not bring his own weapon, but instead just use what he can find at the scene. So let's take a step back. It's the 20th century and it's in New Orleans, and there's a serial killer running around just killing Italians pretty much. So now I believe we should get into the first killing. The first attack attributed to the Axeman occurred on the night of May 22nd, 1918. Joseph Maggio, an Italian grossier, and his wife Catherine were sleeping along one another in their home on a peaceful night on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolian Street. However, things would take a turn for the worse whenever a mysterious figure would break into their home and attack them both. The killer broke into the home and proceeded to cut both of their throats with a straight razor as they were sleeping. The killer continued to bash their heads in with an axe that he found in the couple's home, leaving a pool of blood at their bodies. After the killing had taken place, the axe was left in the home of the bathroom and the razor thrown off in the neighbor's garden. Joseph Maggio survived the attack but literally died minutes after being discovered by his brothers. During the investigation on the crime scene, they discovered that no valuables have been taken and everything was left exactly how it was. And you'll see this pretty much for the rest of the killings because the Axeman's motive is not to rob the place or take anything valuable from the victims. No valuable items had been taken, pretty much eliminating burglary as a motive kind of. However, the razor blade used to kill both of the couples was found to belong to Joseph Maggio's brother, who ran a barber shop on Camp Street, and he would become a main suspect. However, he explained to them that he got rid of the razor 2 days ago prior to the murder. He explained that he wanted to have a nick honed from the blade. Although he was a main suspect, he was released after some investigators were unable to break down his statement and due to a lack of evidence. Upon further investigation, they found a cryptic message written literally in chalk on the pavement a short distance from the murder scene. The message read, Miss Maggio will sit up tonight like Miss Tony. The police, however, theorized this message to be interpreted as a reference to the alleged attack of the another couple of Italian grocers in June 1911. Now, back to the Maggios. Murder. The police had very little evidence and clues to go off on. The killer made sure not to leave anything behind, and even if he did, it would not leave to much since the weapons he used were from the victim's home. Investigators immediately questioned several people, but all were released for a lack of evidence. Also, I would like to also mention and remind you guys that this is back in 1918, so there was no advanced fingerprinting or forensic way to get fingerprints or that much physical evidence kind of. So now, some of you may be wondering how the Axeman gained access to the Maggio's home. Well, it's a lot more weird than you would think. You usually would think that he broke down the door or maybe broke through a window to sneak through, but no, instead he entered by chiseling small holes in their doors and walls. And by some miracle, he would manage to slip through these tiny entrance points, which is just so strange to gain access to a random home. But it wouldn't be long until he would strike next. At 7 in the morning on June 27th, about a month later than the first killing, a baker would make a delivery to a grocery store owned by Luis Bessumer. However, he would get an underlying feeling that something was wrong. The baker, realizing something was not quite right, the baker went to their home at the rear of the store where he knew Bessumer and his supposed wife Harriet were at. However, the baker would find both Bessumer and Louis Harriet in a puddle of their own blood, both bleeding from their heads. They have both received multiple blunt force injuries to the skull, but somehow they both managed to survive the encounter. Bessumer was said to be clubbed with a small hatchet just above his right temple, and Louis was sliced over her left ear. She was found unconscious when police arrived at the scene. The Bessumers had been hacked at by a man wielding an axe who'd again knocked out a panel in their back door and entered their bedroom while they were asleep. The axe, which actually belonged to Luis, was once again found in the bathroom, and no valuables have been taken from the property. Now, earlier, notice how I said Bessumer's supposed wife Harriet? Well, yeah, it's because it was later found out that Harriet was Bessumer's mistress, and that they weren't together, and things got even stranger between these two. Well, first, during investigation, the police thought it was the baker who found them nearly dead. They thought he committed the crime, but police had no evidence and casted out the baker out of the equation. So then they turned their heads toward another suspect who worked at the grocery store owned by Bessumer, who the Harriet claimed that after the attempted murder, she stated that she remembered having been attacked by a mulatto man. By the way, mulatto means mixed color. However, her statement was discounted by police due to her disillusional state that she was in. So during further investigation, Harriet tells officials that it was Bessumer who attacked her, but he was also attacked as well, so it kind of makes no sense. But Harriet claimed that Bessumer was a secret German spy who tried to kill her. After she announced this, the police arrested Bessumer and he was charged with murder and arrested by police. 2 months later, Harriet died due to the complications resulting from the injuries she sustained from the attack. However, before she passed away, she pointed the finger out of guilt towards Bessumer, claiming that he was a German spy. But Bessumer was released from prison after serving 9 months in prison, which is crazy because there was no evidence that showed he really did it. And also, he was also attacked by the Axeman, so why would he? It just makes no sense. But again, they were both attacked by the axe, and no valuables were taken from the scene, so robbery was not a motive for this assault. The next victim up was Anna Schneider, who was viciously attacked on August 5th, 1918. This one, in my opinion, is one of the more brutal ones. Anna was 8 months pregnant during the time of the attack. After a long day at work, her husband returned home to find his wife covered in blood. Her scalp had been cut open and her face was completely covered in blood. However, again, another victim managed to survive the Axeman's attack, and I gotta say, she took it like an absolute champ. Also, if the Axeman is trying to kill them, this guy sucks. I mean, is he missing, or does he not swing the axe hard enough? Because he's not killing them. But Anna managed to survive the encounter, and upon gaining consciousness, she recalls to her remembering a dark figure standing over her and was bashed in the face repeatedly. but she also remembers seeing an axe. However, the windows and doors of the apartment appear to have not been forced open, and the authorities came to a conclusion that the woman was most likely attacked with a lamp that had been on a nearby table. Lead investigators begin to publicly speculate that the attack was related to the previous incidences involving Basumer and Maggio. Now, luckily for Anna, the attack did not affect her child, and she would later give birth after the attack. Now, the attack on Anna kind of made a shift in the Axeman's memo, because leading up to this third assault, Anna was neither Italian nor a grossier, so therefore the citizens of New Orleans realized that anybody can be a target, and pretty much the Axeman would cut down anyone that got in his way. But just 5 days later, yet another grossier, a man going by the name Joseph Romano, was attacked on August 10th. The elderly grossier lived with his two nieces, who awoke to the sound of a commotion in his room where their uncle rested. Upon entering, they saw Joseph had been struck on the head and was badly bleeding. Now, the nieces, upon entering the room, were able to catch a glimpse of the Axeman fleeing from the scene. The woman described him as a dark-skinned, heavy-set, and wearing a dark suit and a slouch hat. Just like the other attacks, the attacker had chiseled a panel out of the back door to gain entry, and again, no items of value had been stolen. However, the elderly man Joseph would not be so lucky with surviving the encounter, because 2 days later after the attack, Joseph would die due to his wounds. Now, the Joseph case would cause this is the one that caused massive chaos throughout New Orleans, with residents living in fear of the Axeman. Police started to receive a slew of reports in which citizens claimed to have seen the Axeman lurking in New Orleans neighborhoods. The police had massive pressure on their shoulders, as they were very unsuccessful to solve these murders and crimes being done by the Axeman. Detectives began to hypothesize whether these killings were being done by the same individuals that did the killings in 1911. They started to suspect that the Axeman was a killer that had no real motive and simply had a desire to kill. A lot of the cases didn't make any sense at all. The Axeman's chisel, which he used to remove the wooden door panels, was always left behind, and why did he never bring his own axes? And he would always use axes found in other people's homes, despite the fact that many of the people he had attacked were Italian grossiers, but not all of them were. So what links the victims together? Now, after this, the Axeman would actually go on a bit of a hiatus from the killings and would disappear for a while, until 7 months later, on the 10th of March 1919, the Axeman would find his next victim. Nothing about his killings would change. He would only target certain people, and he would enter the house via his trademark chiseling out of the back door panel. He used an axe taken from the victim's household, and he would steal no valuables after the attack. In nearby Gretna, Louisiana, screams would be heard from residents. The Axeman's next victims were Charles Cortamilia, who was an immigrant and grossier who lived with his wife Rosie and 2-year-old daughter Mary in the town of Gretna, just across the Mississippi River from New Orleans. Now, remember how I said the pregnant Anna one was one of the more brutal ones? Yeah, I take that back, because this one is the worst one out of them all. In the morning hours, residents would hear screams from the Cornelius family's home. Within the home, Rosie Cornelia awoke to the sight of her husband Charles fighting the Axeman. It was a fight he would lose, taking multiple blows to the head and suffering a fractured skull. The Axeman would then turn his attention to Rosie, who was cradling her 2-year-old daughter in her arms. The axe came down upon both of them, killing the child instantly and fracturing Rosie's skull. Orlando Jordan, their neighbor, rushed across the street to investigate the screaming. There, he found the 3 of them had been attacked. However, it was too late, as Jordan, upon arrival, witnessed Charles laying in a pool of blood on the floor as Rosie stood in the doorway with injuries dealt to her and her daughter. The couple was rushed to the charity hospital, where it was discovered that both had suffered skull fractures. Nothing was stolen from the house, but a panel on the back door had been chiseled away, and a bloody axe was found on the back porch of the home. Charles and Rosie would both make full recoveries, surviving the Axeman's brutal encounter. But when Rosie would fully recover, she would point all the guilt and blame on Jordan, the one neighbor who came to their assistance. Now, crazy enough, officials believed her, and Jordan was arrested and charged with murder. And And that's just crazy to me because Charles, however, immediately denied his wife's claims and false reports, states, and he divorced her shortly afterwards. And you know what's even crazier? Later on, Rosie retracted her testimony, saying that she pointed the finger of guilt to Jordan out of pure jealousy. So she made fake claims and reports knowing that it wasn't Jordan that attacked the Cormelia family. So the Axeman is still an unidentified serial killer, and police were still puzzled on who the Axeman truly was. The case was also hindered by a lack of physical evidence. The Axeman was careful to leave no fingerprints or DNA at the crime scene, and the weapon he used was often left behind, making it difficult to trace. So he decided to display and send a couple of messages to the police. Following the Cormelia's murders, New Orleans was again filled with terror and once again began to arm themselves. But on March 13th, the Axeman decided to write to the Times newspaper. The letter header said hell, and it was addressed to esteemed mortal. Among the letter, the Axeman stated the following, quote, Hell, March 13th, 1919, esteemed immortal. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim all their victims. I alone will know who they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only assume me, but his satanic majesty, Francis Joseph, etc., but to tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need for such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am. But I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will seize my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axeman, end quote. So this letter tells us a couple of things. First of all, it sounds like some type of supervillain, but in the letter he also makes some mentions of angels of death and his satanic majesty. He also refers to the time as earthly time, almost like he sees himself as like a higher entity than the rest of the world. He also threatens the New Orleans and makes a proposition by basically explaining that if he's not hearing jazz music on March 19th at 12:15 past midnight, then he will continue his killings. Basically saying, if I don't see New Orleans dancing, then I'm cutting your head off. So on March 19th, when the clock struck 12:15, the city of New Orleans was alive and noisy as the people made sure to jazz it out. A local composer, Joseph Davila, even created a song just for the night entitled The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz. It would go on to become a huge hit. Although it's doubtful that every household that night blared out jazz music into the early hours. The Axeman clearly was satisfied with what he heard, as not a single attack occurred that night. It was almost like everything was over. Everyone thought that the Axeman would be no more, and yeah, that pretty much he would be gone after that. But it wouldn't take long until the Axeman targeted his next victim. On August 10th, 1919, Steve Boca would awaken in the middle of his night only for him to find a large figure standing over him. Steve Boca, a grossier, was attacked in his bedroom as he slept by an axe-wielding intruder, with the Axeman cracking his head open with his usual weapon of choice. Nothing was stolen, and the back door panel was once again removed with a chisel. But again, one of the victims would survive. Boca would recover, but he said he couldn't remember any details from the attack. A month later, the Axeman would make another attack on the night of September 3rd, 1919. A young girl going by the name Sarah Lawman was attacked with an axe while she slept in her locked and shuttered home. When neighbors came to check on the young woman who had lived alone, they discovered her lying unconscious on her bed, suffering from a severe head injury. A bloody axe was discovered on the front lawn of the building. However, upon investigation on the scene, police discovered that the Axeman had not entered in his usual way, but instead through a window, which is not his type of style of entry. This led many to believe that this was not the work of the Axeman, but perhaps a copycat. Now, before we explore more into the idea, we should cover one of the very last killings of the Axeman. His last killing would take place only a month later than the previous ones. On October 27, 1919, during the night, Mike Patone was attacked. When his wife heard a noise and got to his bedroom door, a large man with an axe was leaving the scene. Mike Pepitone was covered in his own blood after being struck in the head. The majority of the room was covered in blood, including a painting of the Virgin Mary. Miss Pepitone was unable to identify the murder's characteristics. The final of the alleged Axeman attacks was the murder of Pepitone, and just like that, it was all over. The Axeman was never seen or heard of again, like he simply vanished into thin air. Almost like he said, okay, I've had my fun, now the game is over. So, through his span of crimes of 1918 through 1919, in total he killed 6 people and injured another 6 in the process. However, many speculate that this number is much higher than what's reported. So, those were all the killings that were committed by the Axeman. So now, let's dive into some of the most likely theory to who the Axeman was. Now, there are multiple theories to who the Axeman was. Like many say, it might have been the Black Hand, which was a mafia, or others say it was just copycats that try to copy the Axeman's killings, which this one seems possible, but I wouldn't say for a majority of the attacks. And the others say it was an actual angel of death, or some ungodly demon committing these crimes, which I doubt, because that means some people were able to fight off the Axeman, so I don't see this one being real. But, so, I will present the theory that is most likely the one, which is that the attacks were made by a man going by the name Joseph Mumfre. Now, on so many articles and information online, they pronounce the guy's names in many different ways. Like they say Joseph Mumfre, Joseph Monfre, Joseph Manfre. So which one is it? I don't think it matters though, since I'm pretty sure they're all referring to the same guy. But Joseph was one of the main suspects for a very long time until he was killed. So Joseph led a blackmailing gang in New Orleans that targeted Italian Americans. However, Joseph was allegedly shot to death in December 1920 in Los Angeles by the widow of Mike Pepitone. So remember how Pepitone was the Axeman's last victim? Well, the wife of Pepitone, Miss Pepitone, shot and killed Joseph Mumfre. So this happened in 1920 of December, more than a year later than the Axeman's last killing. And so basically it went down like this. Joseph approached Miss Pepitone, who had remarried, but her second husband had disappeared without a trace. Joseph pretty much demanded $500 and jewelry from Miss Pepitone. Mumfre threatened that if she didn't cooperate, he would kill her the same way he had killed her husband. At this moment, Miss Pepitone retrieved 2 guns and fatally shot Mumfre, who had a pistol in his pocket, at least 11 times. This killed him, and Miss Pepitone stated that it was in use for self-defense. Also, Mumfre had served time in prison from the dates apparently coinciding between 1912 and 1918 when the Axeman attacks stopped. They resumed at the same time Mumfre was released from prison, so he probably left New Orleans after the killing of Mike Pepitone. again explaining why the Axeman seemingly disappeared after 1919. And on top of that, it turns out Mumfre had been in dispute with one of the victims, Louis Bessumer, over a piece of property, and he was also known to have a strained relationship with another victim, Joseph Romano. Mumfre was arrested and charged for the murder of the elderly man Romano at first, but was released due to a lack of evidence. It's almost like he killed these two, Bessumer and Romano. It's almost like he killed them. On the other hand, sources revealed there were many that have called a man that were there was a man called Joseph Mumfre in New Orleans connected to organized crime and was pretty much accused of committing a bombing in 1907. Also, apparently in 1912, two of the alleged early victims of the Axeman, an Italian couple named Sciambra, were shot by an intruder in their home, and the prime suspect was referred to the name of Mumfre multiple times. Now, there are a couple of things that are holding people off from believing that this man was the Axeman. One, many believe that the dates of when he was in prison are wrong. Many state that he was in prison from 1918 through 1919 instead of 1912 through 1918. Now, if this is true, then he cannot be the Axeman since he would be in prison during the Axeman's murders. Two, and the main one that many believe that it can't be him, is that he probably didn't exist. You're probably wondering, what? Well, let me explain. Many claims that there's no official reports or police evidence of official documents that a man, Joseph Mumfre, was shot by Miss Pepitone in Los Angeles, leading some to believe his existence is pure urban legend. And to some extent, they are right. There are no official documents of this encounter. All we have is this old newspaper being reported and taking their word from Miss Pepitone. Now, this newspaper does go into detail about the whole story of hers and the encounter with Mumfre. And in my opinion, I don't really know if the Los Angeles Sunday Times back then would report fake news like this and make an entire section dedicated to Miss Pepitone's story if it was fake. But who knows at the end of the day. However, I do believe that this is the best theory. Mumfre being involved with the mafia and having a dispute with the Axeman's previous victims, and also the time when he was in prison, pretty much the time he was released in prison. It's just too much of a coincidence. So, did we finally solve it? Was it Mumfre who was the Axeman, or was the Axeman just a serial killer who was never identified? And the real answer is, we don't know. But that wraps up the video. Thank you all for watching this video. I really hope it was as entertaining for you guys to stick around to the end. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you all for the support recently. It's been amazing. So yeah, thank you all for watching. But that's about it. So I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.